The first meeting of the committee to evaluate our needs for the town and to assess what would be appropriate in terms of recommending to the voters of Whitman an override to provide sufficient funding and stability for the community. The first order of business should be to select a chairman, vice chairman, and clerk. So, since I will be neither, I will be happy to officiate the selection of chairman. And by that I mean I'm inviting nominations for chairman of the committee.
I got a correspondence from Randy who did request that he would chair the committee.
Yeah, he
So I'll
expressed that
nominate him.
interest to me as well.
I don't know if anybody wants to...
Second.
You know if anybody else interested?
I was disappointed when it's not here.
That's why
Okay.
you showed up today.
Hearing no further nominations,
All right.
we will confirm that Selectman Randy Lamatina has been selected to chair this group. Now we need a vice chair.
I'd be happy to.
Great.
I'll make the nomination.
Second.
Yeah.
Okay, so Scott Lambiase has been nominated as vice chair.
Only because I don't want to be secretary.
Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, we'll bring it to a vote. All in favor of Scott as vice chair?
Aye.
It's unanimous. And finally, the committee needs a clerk. The silence is deafening. Well, let's start this way. Is there anyone who is interested in serving as clerk of the committee? And we'll provide some clerical support for that.
What does the clerk do?
The clerk is the official keeper of the records for the committee. The clerk will certify attendance and records. Typically, if we don't have a recording secretary, the clerk also serves in that role. We do have recording devices, and it should not be difficult to construct records as necessary. I said I'm not, but given the fact that most of the information you need will pass through my office anyway, I'm willing to assume that responsibility if the committee wishes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Frank.
Okay, Dave, would you kindly reach behind you and hand that gavel and that little hammer disc to the vice chair? If you do a really good job, you get a commemorative one.
Keep banging that. That's it.
Good to go.
That doesn't really work.
So, does everyone have agenda, or should we?
Do we have an agenda?
It's brief.
Yes, right, it's very small, right?
Yeah.
Very small. That's what you sent out?
Have we made it through that?
It is small.
What was number 2 on the agenda? I'm assuming the election of officers was number 1.
Yeah, public forum was number 2.
Anyone?
I neglected that, so we'll call for that now.
Okay. Next item on the agenda.
Discuss community needs and focus for committee.
So, I mean, obviously, I think we know what our community needs are overall, but I think the focus of the committee, most important here, Frank, is our intention to put together an action plan for putting together this override number? And
Yes,
how we're going to get from here to the town meeting with a number and get the information out?
I think what we need to do short-term is take the information that we already have available that we've collected. I have requested 5-year, and because no one has responded, I've compromised and I've asked for 3-year estimates of expenditures. As far as the capital planning goes, we'll do that. And that will be more the focus of the capital committee than the department heads.
Well, the Collins Center was doing your 5-year plan for you.
Right.
Is that
The
done?
capital, that's,
Is it,
we have our second, what do you call it? Proposed draft. Well, first one wasn't even a draft. Next Thursday, I'm meeting with Carl Kowalski, Dan Salvucci, and I are meeting with them to go over the information they have and what they've done, and if it's acceptable, schedule a public meeting to present and review it. There's still some work to be done on defining and prioritizing capital. I mean, there are things that have come up since we've handed them the update after our town meeting. One of the things that is going to be significant in the upcoming budget is the reality that we're going to have to replace a primary sewer pipe, a force main that goes from Whitman to the wastewater treatment plant. The cheapest alternative is in excess of $8 million. We are looking at whether or not there's any impact funds or anything else that can help us with it. But, you know, that's year to year, you're going to get things that are just going to skew the numbers.
but ultimately, so when we're ready to have our plan together, we need all that information.
Absolutely.
So that's coming.
We need a
Sooner than later.
budget. We need a long-term budget, at least 3 years.
I think you need 5 myself. Yeah.
Well,
I do a 5-year projection.
I mean, if I can get 3-year budgets from departments, I can extrapolate them, because the longer you go in an expenditure budget, the less accurate it's going to be.
No, but it at least gives us a better
Right.
base to look forward and say, if we're putting together an override number, we certainly don't want to say 3 years from now, we may be back in this boat, or let's do a total 5-year projection on everything, consistent with the capital plan, knowing that, yeah, things are going to change, but it's the best we can do. And those numbers, I mean, I think if you put it out to the department heads with, starting with where you are today,
Right.
and your anticipated need for year 1 through 5 with, basic increases that we would expect to see, typical increases, it's the best we can do.
Without getting into particulars, I've been unavailable a lot of the past few weeks. I had surgery recently. Part of it went well. Part of it's still up for grabs. But unfortunately, that wasn't good enough. I also contracted pneumonia the other day. So on day 3 of antibiotics, I'm hoping it'll get better. Which means my time, at least for the next week, is going to be based on my doctor's orders, and more importantly, my wife's orders, are going to be rest. I will return to work next week. I'll do as long a schedule as I can, but my plan coming back next week is to start meeting with each department head to go over budgets and projections, because they have to be built.
Yeah, I mean, we need the budget for next year anyways, to get together, so one way or another. Is the town accountant going to participate?
Absolutely.
in this, but I mean, I know he's not on the committee.
He will
Was
be
it
a
our intention to
resource.
have him?
He will be a resource for us, yes. And we'll be asking him to join when we feel
So I guess
it's helpful,
to bring it all around, what we were trying to do is come up with our scope
right?
and define it.
So, as I understand it, the scope is we build a 5-year budget, we build a 5-year
Capital plan.
capital plan. We take our current expenditures, which is really base zero. We look at the projected budget for the following year based on needs and based on anticipated expenditures. And we're going to do separate budget, Article 2 kind of budgets, and capital budgets. And each department will have to have both. And each one will have to be projected for the upcoming years. I was tempted to bring the first draft spreadsheet that I saw a couple of weeks ago as part of the capital report, but it's 178 items. There's a methodology for setting details, and I think at the point where we meet with them, we have to determine how that methodology works, whether, we have priority needs in this area, we have priority needs in that area, we have X number of dollars to fund, and this plan will involve borrowing. This plan will involve long-term planning and long-term borrowing, balancing out the needs and our ability to pay, because obviously a $5 million project coming out of tax revenue is just an impossibility. But a 5-year bond is a different story. And that's the way we have to start looking at things. We have to,
I mean, I guess so. I guess what this group will also need then is sort of an explanation of what's coming off over the next
Right.
5 years, 10 years.
sadly, there's very little coming off.
And that's the good news, right?
All of our borrowing has been relatively
We got a ways to
new.
go.
We're waiting for some of that borrowing to start returning dollars to the budget. But I'm actually confident that if we just get these things together in a formal way and we look at them as part of a total picture, we should be able to put together a plan that works and can be given to the public in a way that makes sense.
So we just finished our 5-year plan last week. It's very time consuming, it's very cumbersome because you have to look at the contract and you need to look at vacations and everything else and seniority levels and all kinds of stuff. So, in between all of the year-end stuff and everything else, it's taken a considerable amount of time. But we only projected our budget out for 5 years based on where we are today.
Right?
Are we looking for budgets from department heads that are going to make their departments whole? Meaning, if we're going for a $2.5 or $3 million override, are we looking at Bruce to say we cut X amount of dollars, like from your budget in fiscal 20? What did that do to your department? What do you need to make that whole? And I'm not saying reach in for the sky and grab like the schools. Oh, I want like 10 million, and Bruce wants 3 million, and I need 2 million. No, it's what makes you whole and what maintains the fabric of what we have in Whitman.
I
and
think
presses
the-
us forward slightly.
I think the answer
That
to
makes
that
sense.
is the budget has to reflect what you believe is necessary to operate your department appropriately. In your case, the budget should reflect your ability to respond to medical calls, fires, and emergency services.
Right, and we did that.
Same thing with Bruce. Same thing with the police. It's a process that we have to look at. We had a discussion at the last selectmen's meeting about budget line balances and transfers, and this is something that I think we're going to have to understand as a group when we prepare our budgets. Some of us can really accurately predict what our budget numbers are going to be, because there's very little room for variance. Others can't. For example, you run an operation that requires shift-for-shift coverage. The police chief runs an operation that pretty regularly, but not always, requires shift-to-shift coverage. So a lot goes into calculating that. And it's impossible to come up with an accurate number that will put you at the end of the year within 0.5% of your number. We talked about budgets like police or fire being over at the end of the year, a couple of $100,000. That sounds like a lot of money, but divided into 3.5 or $4 million, and you're talking about less than 2%. Now, look at the potential cost if you have IODs, and the laws governing IOD have changed pretty dramatically in the last year. You could have 6 people out, and you have to pay those people 100% of their salary, plus you have to pay time and a half the 6 people that are filling those jobs. So if those jobs are worth, on a base number, $72,000 a year, well, then on fill-in time, it's 100 and what? 72 times 537.
Close enough, yeah.
$112,000, $113,000. So that could throw your budget off by $600,000.
Absolutely.
And we have had years, you have had people out for a year. We've had years where in the police department, we've had people out 2.5 years. And that's because of the way the system and 111F work. It requires, you can't just, hey, you're sick, no, you can't come back to work, you're out. If there's a potential for you to come back to work, then you stay on IOD. The ones that are simple is when there's no way you can come back. So you're going to have flexibility in those budgets, and some people are going to look at that as fluff. So we have to do a good job of getting people to understand why we do those budgets the way we do. But every budget that's prepared, whether it's my office, the assessors, they're going to have to reflect real-time expectations. Now, we're going into a triennial assessment, so automatically our fee is going to go up from $35,000 to $72,000 a year. Not good news when you're trying to build a future budget, but those are things that happen, and those are things we need to prepare for.
So, am I correct in the statement of saying that we are looking at the department heads to present to this committee or the 5-year budget, which pretty much maintains what they're doing now with any type of increase, I guess, is the best bet? And I'll use an example, or like 2 examples. There was something in the paper last week where we're about to be mandated for full-day kindergarten, I think, Jeff?
It's
So,
up there. We're one of two in the area, so.
so this is the opportunity to bring full-day kindergarten in, like, to the district.
Well, I suspect this would have been one of the issues strongly supported by the school department anyway, under the expectation of an override that full-day kindergarten was going to be part of it.
And if you look at the other end of the spectrum, I think that there are times that the police department has maybe one car on the road or two cars on the road. That's not public safety Whitman for police.
No, it's not, and that's why the capital plans have to work that way. So I guess the biggest part of my job is going to be making sure that we get all those budgets in, put the numbers together, and then provide them to the
I mean, I
committee.
think what would be helpful to me, right, is certainly the current budget, but with a little bit of definition about what it means. So not reaching for the stars, like you said, but what are we missing? So what are we missing compared to the towns around us, right? I know we're down to a handful of towns that don't support full-day kindergarten, because that's something I pay close attention to. I know we just eliminated our language program, because we're now the worst in the 31 surrounding cities and towns, because we have none, right? Something I pay attention to. But what does that mean for you, right? That's hard for me to see from a fire perspective or a DPW perspective or even a police perspective. So I think that would be helpful. So as you kind of give us that 5-year projection, what's missing from that, or what are you putting in that really just gets us to a place that really kind of level sets us against maybe the towns around us, or like towns, and then what are the extras if we're really going to consider, an operational override? What are those things we need to get in there that we should do looking forward 5 years, right? Looking forward 3 years. What's the next thing coming down the pike that, hey, it makes sense to do it now, so we're not back here asking for more, 3 years from now. To me, that's kind of the way that I would just approach it, and would love to hear kind of that breakdown from, I think, the different.
So because of our timetable, because we're looking at what, October?
That was my
November?
question. Is there going to be a date set for a fall town meeting?
I would like to see it in October, but I think we all need to know that we're prepared to deliver that information. I would rather deliver it in November if it's more fully explained and more clearly understood. These meetings are going to be public, people are going to be talking about it, certainly going to be part of every
So
selectmen's meeting.
I guess the question, the deliverable from this group
Yep.
is going to the selectmen. Is it going to be an overall recommendation to either, we do need the override, this is why, and this is the dollar amount that we're recommending you ask, and this is why.
I would say yes.
And then, so the charge of us in between, and the first thing we need obviously is a year one budget,
Right.
which we need anyways, and the FinCom's gonna look at it. We need that year one budget with all that projections going forward and that big number for us to make
Right.
any recommendation. But once we have that, we want to have, I'm guessing, presentation from fire, police, school, DPW to this group to explain why their numbers are where they are, or do we want, or, in order for us to make that recommendation, do we want each one of them to come to us? What I'm getting at is this is not gonna be a quick, easy process, and we're in August by the time we.
No, it's not. And
It's,
it's a fair question. If we start holding, and I hate to call it that, budget hearings, it's certainly going to bog down what we're doing.
well, I
Lisa-
don't want it to be a budget hearing
Right.
either, though. I think you can't, but I think, so we need to conceptualize and explain to us.
Exactly.
Like, as Tim said, look, I'm not asking for everything. This is what I need, and this is what I think, this is why I think over the next 5 years, this is what's gonna happen. And this is what's gonna keep us whole. The other part is, if we're looking at his simple budget and you extrapolate what our revenues are and what our expenses are, we're gonna see there's obviously gonna be a void there.
Variance.
And his other explanation to us is, if we don't get an override, how are you gonna make up for this gap? Because there's definitely going to be a gap. And so your explanation's gonna be, you're gonna have to cut, obviously, something. to make up for that gap, if an override doesn't happen or we don't ask for one.
Right.
And that's gonna be a bigger picture,
So, and that's
obviously.
part of why I want to meet with each department head, God willing, next week, so we can talk about the specifics that are going to go into the planning on the budget. For example, what are we using as an assumed labor cost? That's not something I want to kick around
It's a tough one, yeah.
in
But-
a
Yeah, exactly.
rate by rate basis, but we're going to have to look at it as dollars. And we're going to have to figure out how to get those dollars.
Do you anticipate, or is it your vision that you'll kick this off with some sort of a memo that's gonna go out that this is what we're doing, so
Well, sadly, the memo went out, I just haven't
you haven't got...
had a lot of response to it, so now it's going to be phone
Funny time of
calls.
year.
it's a tough time.
And it is, it's really hard to get things moving in June and July. But, I mean, in June, we didn't even end our town meeting until June 19th. So the people were starting their collective relief size at the end of June. It's now July 22nd, and we haven't closed the books yet because the accountant's still processing warrants that were carried over and some of the other things that are necessary to finalize our year. And I say they haven't, I'm assuming they haven't because last night I connected to the network and looked at a few year-end budgets where I know some last-minute entries were made and they're not there yet. So that may mean they're in packets and they just haven't been reviewed and confirmed. But that's an important piece.
Right.
Because involved in all of those budgets are added money to some departments, lesser money to others. The fact that we transferred money out of a department or a line in June for something else doesn't necessarily mean that money should not have been available. So that's part of the balancing act too. But clearly, this committee can't work without numbers. So what I presented tonight, for your benefit, for your reading pleasure. Why do we not have both?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Just from an outsider, looking at the committee, I was hoping that, I had asked about the strategic plan.
There should have been two
last week,
documents.
but I was hoping that one of the things that would be discussed
Yeah,
is
that's the other one.
like a solution to the financial difficulty that we're facing. So not only just like the budgets and how difficult
I
they are,
hope
what's
everybody
needed,
got
but
that.
also something that would
Did you get
kind of
two
be attractive
packets?
to taxpayers as they're looking at a plan moving forward. Something like economic development or something like that, and how
So
this
you're
is
sure?
addressing that. You know, like,
got one.
one of the things that we're considering to overcome this burden 5 years from now is to do a little bit of US
You
thinking.
had more of these. Did you
Things
bring
like
one? You brought
economic
them up,
development,
right?
get more
I
business.
brought up the
something like
file I
that. So
had.
That's gonna take some
And Tim,
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if that's if that falls into the mission of
I
this.
just talked about it.
There was an economic development group. I remember meeting with them a long time ago. We sort of disbanded, but that's the kind of thing, I don't know that this group,
That's what I was bringing up with the scope.
yeah, I don't know if it falls into the scope of this. I think we're charged with getting something sooner than later that I think that, probably we could look at it and say we should revise
That's why
an economic development committee, because I think it's important that we have one. I gotta say, one of the, my biggest probably bad move when I was on the Board of Selectmen was voting against, Frank wanted to have a part-time planner in here. I didn't think we needed one, and that was a big mistake, because that's the type of person that will lead this. It's probably something we should consider going forward when we're putting a budget together, too. You lose out on a master plan, you lose out on your strategic plan, and we've lost out on any economic development, grants, because that stuff, if without that person, unfortunately, it falls to these two, who are, stretched doing human resources and everything else at the same time. So, yeah, to answer that, I think that this committee might, passing, look at it and consider it, make a recommendation
We
It is
also,
something that we need.
we also may find, and probably shouldn't say this too loud and discourage anyone, one of my hopes for getting through this is preparing and presenting a successful override, and then drawing from this committee people who might be interested in working on a plan for community growth. I mean, the challenges are immense. Small towns can grow on small businesses and can do well. As it sits today, we have a fairly productive downtown business center, and we have a stretch of business on Route 27 and on Route 18. But trying to grow that business, we have to come up with things that would attract people here. And when you're in our situation, TIFs
Yeah, well,
are not a solution. Last thing we do is bring someone in because they'll pay less taxes.
yeah. I mean, it's nice because it provides jobs in future and provides interest in your community, and hopefully people reinvest in the community. But I do think that part of our overall picture and big picture, as Sean said, and as we're looking at this, is we do need to bring back an economic development committee. And we might have to, maybe we look at it as we hire a consultant to do it, but there are people
Right.
who are really good at stuff like that and really good at providing ideas and helping us find resources and grant money. And yeah, I think we're doing a disservice to the town if we don't at least consider it. And that's something that may be, I mean, it's not necessarily a capital project, but it's gonna be good money.
Well,
You could spend a few $100,000 quick, depending on whether you wanna hire somebody or you wanna bring a consultant.
Revenue can be used for operations and capital needs, and that's how we fund it. I mean, I suspect the final plan that we get from the Collins Group is going to reflect a long-term process for capital with significant borrowing involved, and then coming up with plans to fund that. I mean, it's really simple. The bad news for ratepayers on the sewer side is it's not a tax-driven expenditure. It's all going to come out of rate paying. And one of the things that, and I know I've heard Don comment about it, I've heard other people and the Finance Committee and on the Board of Selectmen comment about it. People think they're overburdened on taxes here, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Take water, and that difference is like 20% or 20 times the difference. I get people who come in, they go ballistic because they got a $650 sewer and water bill from May to October. I get a guy in Weymouth telling me his May to October water bill is $6,000. We're not MWRA. So people don't appreciate what we have because it's been so affordable.
Sometimes they don't know any different, too.
They
only know
don't.
what they know, and
Yeah.
some small increase is a lot to them, but relative to our neighbors.
You see that in the trash bill last year.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that
And
was
if you
that
moved
was
to
a
Abington or
necessary
Rockland.
bill, and I had people going mental over it.
$30.
So I started calling around. The cheapest hauler I could get was, what was it, $375 for bi-weekly recycling and weekly trash, but one barrel? I mean, hey, so those are things we have to work on.
So I guess to go then, is there, within the scope of this committee, we're bringing all this up, but is it going to be ultimately left up to the selectmen for most of this? Are we going to get this together, make our recommendation to the selectmen, and the selectmen is going to figure out how we're going to get it to the public? Or is this committee also going to be, how are we going to educate the public on what our needs are?
I think
long-term needs?
this committee needs to come up with work from the selectman's office to come up with the presentation information that would be necessary. I mean, I think you've all seen the Norwood and the Bourne presentations. They were both great. One flew through, one didn't. And there was a wealth of information in there. That's what we have to do. We have to put it together. It might have to come down to assigning projects, who's handling what part of it. I have Lisa developing on Publisher some little pamphlet style things. The one thing we have to be careful of, once we've made a decision on how to go, and we're ready to start promoting an override, it can't be done at the employee level. The town cannot spend any money to promote that.
That's right.
The only thing we can do, an interesting twist, I found this about 3 months ago. The web is not considered a town resource for some reason.
Well, why?
So,
Right in the name.
we can't print it and hand it out, but we can put it electronically on the web.
A little cheaper.
So that gives us a lot of room to work.
Can this committee can disseminate the information?
Yes, it's
I-
only when we ask for support. Sorry.
No. I just wanted to clarify what you had mentioned, Mr. Lyman, about Norwood and Bourne. Those two towns advocating for, or presenting overrides to their residents, have put together frequently asked question handout, if you will. I think Bourne's was 25 pages. And it's just started with, what is an override? What does it mean? And then it went on. And you can Google it, Bourne override, I think it was 2015. And I had emailed it to various town officials saying, I thought it was really helpful. And I think if we insert Whitman with Bourne and Norwood likewise, Norwood just this past spring.
Were they both successful?
One was, Bourne failed.
Bourne failed.
Bourne failed by, they had about 4,000 voters, failed by like 75 votes. And then Norwood passed last month, it was $5.9 million override, passed.
Significant.
By like
5.9.
70
What's
to
their budget?
30 passed. 5.9
110 million, 190?
This is the package that Norwood.
So
Well-
that's what we're talking about, frequently asked question
attorney.
handout.
Auto mile helps.
I bet.
But they need to.
This is the packet that Norwood developed for educational information that he handed out to residents. And basically the setup, they've got their table of contents, but it starts with a letter from the Board of Selectmen, dear Norwood residents, the Norwood Finance Committee, to the citizens of Norwood, Norwood School Committee, dear town meeting members. So each department,
unity. It's nice.
it starts with a letter from each. And then it gives a summary of the proposed budget override. Increased expenditures on road repair, snow and ice, override stabilization account. So it's fairly simple.
Yep.
Then they have their draft budgets that does include a 5-year for each department, so it goes into that. And then again, projected general government budget cuts, so it talks about that. It's a pretty good handout, and you can find it right online to look at.
And those typically are created by a committee for question one, or because they can raise money and pay for the cost of the publications, whereas we can't.
Which is fine in this day and age. I think we can get as much information out electronically as...
Well, the two things that were in the clip that I passed out were things that the committee should become familiar with. One is the Proposition 2.5 ballot questions, the various ways we can schedule or stagger a ballot, and then the primer on Prop 2.5, which, and it's been a while since I looked at these, so I'm assuming they haven't changed.
They had a really good, Scholastic Rock YouTube video for this on the GLS website. That, you know, it's just amazing how it just makes it simple for anybody to understand it. I think we could have a link to that. It's just as simple as it gets. I mean, how they explain it, so.
So some of the things I think we're going to be challenged to do is how we want to recommend an override. Do we want a single town override? Which, you know, if you're asking me personally, I think that's the way to go. Or do we want a menu? Problem with menus are, once again, you're pitting sections against sections. There are people who might be willing to support one level of government, but not another.
Personally, I think our job is to enable the sustainability of this community.
Right.
Overall.
Yeah,
And
one
that means
question
looking
override.
at the town as a whole.
Right.
It's ultimately going to be the selectmen's decision what question to present and how to present it, whether it's going to be one question or multiples.
After a
And-
recommendation from this committee. I'm
But,
assuming.
right, but we're the ones that have to provide them with the information. And I would expect that the committee, through its chair or vice chair, will have a meeting with the Board of Selectmen, presentation will be made, and then the recommendation of the committee will be made. And I think it's pretty tough to challenge a group of 9 citizens to work on a project and then dismiss the end result. So for all practical purposes, we're setting the task and the table.
So, all right, what we haven't decided, and I guess to sort of circle back, have we listed all of what our charges are going to be? What the scope of this committee is, and I guess the ultimate deliverable? And with that, I guess it would be nice to have a timeline. So I think before we meet again, you know, scope, timeline, and at least our first year budget projections.
Yep.
You know, initially. And
I
then
agree.
I guess my other question, and it's really directed to the schools, is, you know, I think you're on board or hearing us with what we're saying, unity, and
And that's why I like what you just said, Frank, about, you know, the decision versus a menu versus, I'm absolutely opposed to a menu. Absolutely, I think this is, if we're going to be sustainable as a community, and I've got to look at both sides, it has to be all together.
We should be careful about using the word menu, because there is another menu option, right, which is just the amount.
Yes.
So we could certainly, you can
Tier.
provide a tier, right?
Sure.
So let's just, as we kind of use the language, let's make sure, I think what we're all saying though is, regardless of the amount that's either recommended, voted, et cetera, we feel every department should have a piece of that override.
That number, correct. And that's,
And that's defined in the budget, not in the override.
But demonstrated a need, right.
correct.
Because there may be several departments that are like.
So I
I
think
agree with you, Scott.
And that's fair.
That's my.
I would suggest that maybe the first thing
Department against department.
that this committee needs to do is to reach out through an email, and I'll send it out on your behalf if you wish, to tonight or tomorrow, stating that we can't begin our work until you do what you need, so we need your budgets, and we need them now.
yeah.
What we also need is a narrative on your department, why, what you do and why. One of the scope issues of the budget document that, once again, I'm hoping we'll be seeing in the next week, is a kind of a 40 or 50 page presentation of the town, who we are, what we offer, what our budget is, what our capital expenditures have been, in what each department is. What's Public Works? Who manages Public Works? What's your function? The only thing I disagreed with the committee is, and since we're paying them, they're designing it, is they wanted 4 accomplishments you made this year. I don't think that goes a long way toward selling our services unless it's significant. If you can say the year we became a heart community, that would have been a significant event. The fact that we bought our street lights and someday we won't have to pay National Grid for the rental anymore is a significant event. And those are the screwball things that get in the way. We petitioned National Grid in early May last year. By law, they were required to give us a contract by June 25th. I signed it Christmas Eve?
December 21st.
Oh, close. We have since converted
56.
856 lights. We're still, every month, we're still paying rental for those lights. The bill comes in every month at 12, 13, 14,000.
Stop paying.
And they're at, I really thought about it. I did that once with another vendor. It worked, but it took me weeks to fix it and balance out at the end. I said I would never do that again. So they're telling us we're going to get, once they finalize the tariffs, we're going to get a refund. And certainly we'll audit it to make sure we do. But those are savings that help our budget considerably. I mean, we go from $170,000 a month to $80,000, $90,000 a month. That's a significant savings. A year ago, I signed with the approval of the town meeting a net purchasing agreement. They haven't even connected the solar array yet. That's 22% savings on whatever we pay for energy. I mean, that's a big number.
Do we want to give the department heads a deadline
Yes.
as to when we need them?
I want to give them a week.
Give them a week?
When do you think you could have the information to us and we can meet again with that information?
Well,
I mean, fiscal 21 is imperative right now, and then if we give them,
I would like to give them a week from today to deliver those budgets. Then I hope to be back working the following week. I will start meeting with each department to go through the numbers, go through the description of services and needs. So we should be able to compile that in a worksheet by the following, take maybe a couple of days, right? Monday, Tuesday.
We get back on the 12th of August?
We might be able to do
Does
it.
Monday like work for everybody else, by the way?
Yeah,
Yes, it does.
it's typically the only day, yeah.
So if we could have it and reconvene on the same time on the 12th, would you have that information enough for us to sort of digest?
I would say yes, we will.
At the same time, will we have revenue projections?
Yes.
growth, And so forth to look at in
Yes.
comparison?
Because
To
Ken and
expenditures?
I will start working on those.
I was just gonna ask that, do we know from Bob Curran what he has out there for building?
We have an idea.
Permits or what
We
he
have an
has.
idea on growth.
The hard part is that projection, very difficult, to.
Right, it's not consistent in year 2, 3, 4, if it happens to be this year.
And we don't know when the next downtick's
Well,
gonna
when you
be,
do,
or-
for example, this year, we're going to be getting probably I would say 50 to 60 units going online between July 1st and June 30th.
Yeah, at least.
So
What kind of units, Frank?
they're townhouses and apartments.
That are already, that you expect to be permitted or already permitted?
The plans are in, so,
Well, the condos,
But, you know,
But they're ready to be filled, is that what you're saying?
right, I'm saying I expect they'll be built
'cause you know,
over the next 12 months.
Oh,
Condos
okay,
on
all
Bedford Street
right.
will
So
be
it's not
occupied.
move-in time over the next, because my
Yeah,
eyes
you've
just
got,
went, if you
you've
got
got
50
Bedford
units.
Street,
Right.
you've got
Yeah,
Temple
4 kids
Street,
each, right.
and you have Rye Hill. Rye Hill's gonna take a little
right,
longer.
yeah, it's gonna take a long time, but you got Bedford Street that'll be up online to get the downtown block. And strangely enough, we were with Yanni last week. I think he's got 8 apartments down there, and 5 of the 8 are Boston commuters, single.
Those are awesome.
They're moving to Whitman because of the commuter rail.
Taxpayers and kids.
Downtown,
Keep 'em going.
and taking the train into Boston. every day.
See, this is where the stretch of road should be coming in.
Right.
So, we'll have revenue
But
estimates.
as far as growth too, can you look at the 5-year historical, take an average? I don't know what,
we've had a pretty good
Is-
5 years. That's
Yeah, we've had a
where-
good
that
run.
would
Yeah.
scare
Someone's
me.
gonna run.
I think as long as you take out,
Well, there's gotta be
as
some
long as
number.
you take out personal property, yes, we can do a 5-year
Fair
growth.
enough.
Well, you do, you need a number, and you need a place
Yeah,
to
and
start.
take an
so.
average. There has
And-
been growth each
The
year.
Just to
other
be
end-
conservative, I mean.
There
that's-
is
But
another,
something, you look
We
at
need
your-
a base.
We can look back 10 years to the recession and try and get something.
Yeah.
there's another interesting thing I found by virtue of not being able to do anything else. I've been catching up on mail and looking at, researching information. And one of the things that Dawn brought up was opportunities for mis-levy, because we get our levy numbers, we set our tax rate. Once the tax rate's set, we can't do anything till next year. So any money that's there that we should have but didn't know about can't be raised in that year's levy. It is, part of it works its way into the following year. But one of the interesting things I found, I want to look at it a little further, is there appears to be a provision that would allow the assessors, for example, last year we had $762, was it 762 last year? No, 362. In excess levy after setting the tax rate. If I'm reading this provision correctly, we can't appropriate that money, but we can add it to the levy limit by simply adding that excess fund
Yeah, I think I saw that
to the limit.
when I was going through.
Right.
when you
doesn't-
sent that
Even if
information
it
over.
exceeds 2.5, it was
Yeah.
able to capture or recapture.
So those are things that would have made life easier for us the next year because the levy limit would have been higher. And those are the things we have to focus on. I did meet with Kathy Keefe a few weeks ago, and we are going to work with Patriot Properties to get earlier numbers. It doesn't help us to have numbers 2 weeks before the hearing, unless it's early enough for us to hold the town meeting and raise the money. But by then, if we do this right, we shouldn't have to do fall town meetings. And if we do it all, I think what probably would be the sense is to have a budget meeting in May and a capital meeting in the fall and make your capital decisions. That's something to think about, but that's operational.
Yeah.
But I think there's some benefit to that because it takes the focus off the other stuff. And if it's capital, no, just don't put it on this budget. It goes on the capital budget.
Are you referring to 2020, like fall of 2020?
Yes,
The
for
next-
2021. Like, when we start our actually for 2021, when we start our budget process and we come up with a budget in May, we typically come up with a budget warrant, and then we come up with a bunch of articles that are mostly capital in nature. What I'm wondering, and I'm just thinking out loud, I'm not suggesting this is the way we do it, it might make sense to use the spring meeting strictly to set the operational budgets in the fall meeting when the numbers are more secure
Yeah.
to set the capital budgets. Now that comes in conjunction with additional money that's raised and debt management. What's gone on, what's coming off, how do we fund things? You know,
Yeah, from a practices perspective, something like that for me, if we were to look at towns who have been successful really using, close to 100% of their levy, how are they doing it? And I think we're gonna find a lot of them have some type of fall town meeting, right? Because that's
They
really,
do,
yeah,
because-
the only way you get there, right? But what are they posting, what are they voting on in those meetings, versus what we're doing today? I mean, I think that type of comparison and that type of recommendation, on the back end of this committee, right? Some of this has to be, how do we get better?
Yeah, I think
It has to be, how do we get better, otherwise,
within our scope, we could
Yeah.
have recommendations for
Yeah.
improvement. But we have such a short timeline here that
Right.
I'd be afraid.
well,
I
some of
think
these
you're
things are
right,
gonna be
absolutely.
recommendations to just look at them, right?
continue
Like,
on
to
and look
continue
at 'em.
on,
There's an
and
idea,
and
yeah.
whether it's 9 people or 4 people, or, there may need to be additional work that continues to be done after.
But I think that's,
yeah, it won't be a one-year fix.
Right.
On paper, it sounds ideal in the fall, as you mentioned, you have your full, for capital. But in regards to schools, they do use that funding over the summer. Schools close, like this year, capital was requested in May, town meeting, and making those improvements over the summer. So to delay that to the fall, when the town has the ability to look at all capital needs, then you've lost that window of opportunity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but if you knew that it was gonna be done that way, you could.
Structure it.
Yeah, you address the way you
Sure.
plan things, and knowing that it's gonna be in the fall, you could do it. I think another thing this committee needs to look at too is the non-mandated busing line item. Because I think we have a unique opportunity here to talk about it with the schools and with the town. I mean, that's almost $400,000 a year. The FinCon committee came up, kind of had some recommendations at that at the very end of the budget cycle. And I honestly kind of like what they were talking about, leaving a little in the budget for, maybe people that can't afford it or need some kind of, some kind of cut to
Waiver,
it.
special
Waive it.
circumstance.
But, and I heard Frank talking about, well, geez, it's going to be impossible for the town to kind of manage that. And, wondering why we wouldn't just work with the schools to manage that instead of the town trying to manage it, and take that amount, take the that amount and say, all right, some of it's gonna go to the schools to manage the people who are gonna apply for the busing, and let the school handle it since they have the email lists and all that. I mean, that's a big item. Another thing, we're talking about all the development in this town. When Dennis Smith came in to the FinCon committee, one of the things I asked him about was, when was the last time we looked at our rates for what we're charging developers to hook up to our water? And some of the research I had done back then, I had known that Whitman was somewhere in the vicinity of maybe 8,000, a little under 8,000 for, per hookup that went in. Of course, there's a big one-time number for, say, a development.
System
It's
development.
75,000 or something like that, and then it's like 7,800 per house. And that was very similar to Hanson, which was a little under than that. But Hanson only does water, they don't do sewer. Abington's like almost 12,000. So looking at that and seeing, obviously we need the money in that account if we're gonna be looking at doing a sewer line, whatever we can,
Yep.
it's a unique opportunity for us where we have, especially the non-mandated busing. I would think that would be something that, and from what I heard from you in some of the school committee meetings, that's not something you have any trouble with, kind of phasing that out.
As long as we can communicate. I mean, it never came up. In fact, that one time that I called you and I said, a person wants to pay for it. And Frank was like, we don't have a method to collect any money,
Yeah.
So I think it would have been a lead balloon on parents in May.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
It's a
I agree.
It came up
conversation.
way too
Way too late. But I think we're in a
It's a
position now
conversation piece,
where we
absolutely.
could talk about it and, as one of the, obvious, many things we need to talk about. I think that's important to get out there because it is, aside from the budgets looking forward, that's something that's kind of, has been around forever and it's kind of time to go.
To date the decision, I believe it was made when I was on the finance committee. No, this was a lot of years ago.
So that's an interesting point as we reach out to department heads and project 3 or 5 year budgets, hopefully 5-year budgets, including sustainability measures like, if we get rid of non-mandated busing, that doesn't grow as much, shifting the costs around a little bit, or something like, I know the schools, the state will kick in more money if we get a target share, so there would be a priority for us to, reduce the burden on the town by increasing the upfront cost now, but make it a little more sustainable 3 or 5 years in the future.
And I think it's important, though, what Chris said, is that where do we want to be? Because if you want fiscal '21, I can give you a level service budget right now because I don't have any principles around to say, hey, how could you be better in 3 years? So I can give you a level service budget for what we cut from this year without projecting out. But I think talking about a foreign language program, talking about, and this is my only issue with a 5-year budget. 5 years ago, one-to-one devices for every kid was the hot thing. Duxbury went to it, other towns went to it, and now they phased those out. So they made a huge, but instead of the Macs,
iPads,
right?
I sold all the
But
iPads.
it was that process, and educationally, they've retracted. It was a buzz, and then we've gone back. So to make a jump to say, hey, look, in 5 years, this is where I want to be. I think we have benchmarks where we want to be, but I think we've been content to be in the middle, and I'd like this committee to push us, even as a community, with fire, with everything, outside of the middle, just a little bit, so that we can start making those gains.
Just to clarify, Jeff, they're still in Duxbury one-to-one devices. They're just moving from Mac to
I
Chromebook. Is that
think so,
right?
yeah,
You're
I
not
think
just
so.
backtracking completely?
No, but I mean, different schools, I
Off
know
one-to-one.
Spelman went one-to-one, East Bridgewater went one-to-one with Chromebooks. That being said, every kid got one.
Yeah.
Right, and then they had a fire.
Spelman doesn't do it anymore.
They don't do it anymore, so they phased it out. I think we need technology in the schools, but I don't want to put a device in every kid's hand at the cost of the taxpayer. That's gonna, that's not sustainable. So those are the things I'd like to shoot a little bit outside the box to say, where do we want to be in 5 years, pushing us above the middle and bringing the programs that have been gone for years to come back. So, just my 2 cents.
Well, the forms that I filled out, this was research that I did online, on the DLS gateway, that shows the tax rates. This is huge to show exactly when anybody, because actually Friday night, somebody said to me, oh my God, our taxes are so high. I said, actually, no, they're not. We are the lowest. And there's 2 towns on here that are purposely here so that we can say, when all those people say, if we get more business, it's going to lower our taxes. If you look at Avon and Rockland, they have large commercial base, they have industrial base. Now, Avon has a split tax base. I did not put their corporate and industrial. Rockland has a single tax base. But if you look at their tax percentages, having that large bay commercial and industry has not kept their taxes low. Actually, Avon is one of the higher ones. And Rockland's right up there. So all of that myth out there that the more business we get in, the less it's going to make our taxes is absolutely not true. And there's 2 towns purposely that show that.
Avon also has over 2 million in free cash.
You don't have the property
Sooner or
in this
later,
town to
someone's
bring in
gonna
the
know
large
this.
businesses that you need to bring in a large tax base. All that you're gonna get for business in town is the small, like mom and pop stuff. They can't afford.
And
huge
some
taxes.
residents don't want big business either.
That's right,
They want to
exactly.
keep the small town.
Which
There's
comes with a
cost.
cost.
Which comes with
Every time we have a
Residents.
decent-sized business proposal. People turn out, and it's a really idiotic example. We have a person in town who operates a kennel in Hanson. And there's, I don't know if you're familiar with the building, but if you're heading toward Brockton, on your left-hand side, just before the power lines, is a big white,
And now it's bright orange.
okay, they changed.
Oh, red.
Building, I mean, it's got to be every bit of 80,000 square feet. And it's commercial. Again, it's literally 80 feet from the power lines. The guy wanted to build an 80, what do you call those things? I don't want to say
Cage,
cell.
kennel.
Kennel.
80 sectional kennel to take care of animals. He operates a smaller shop in Hanson. It's clean, it's nice, it's been very profitable for him. So he comes to Whitman. Now, this is a place that we've had a couple of businesses go in and fail. We had a couple of businesses, one business go in there and decide to start a business without any need for a license or alcohol permit or anything. So, it was part church, part nightclub, as I remember. So it's vacant. So what a great idea. Good way to make some money. Neighbors showed up. No, it's going to be bad for the neighborhood. We're barking dogs. The nearest house, the property line was 400 feet from the building. Our zoning board turned them down.
How many acres of land?
It's probably an acre and a half.
Still
The business is now in Hanover.
And now, yeah,
Yep.
now it's vacant.
Yeah, I mean, and one that at least worked a little bit for us when Purity Supreme pulled out, guy came in and wanted to make a 24-hour gym. I was excited about it. Right in this, almost in the center of town. ZBA turned it down. Said no, they might deal drugs at night. So it sat vacant for a while, but at least Stop and Shop had an interest in putting Peapod there. So yeah, when we get some of these bigger businesses, we're up against it from an attitudinal nature. People, I don't know what it is about people just don't want business around them.
Well,
I don't get it.
so I guess along with our scope now, we're gonna make some recommendations to our, what we see going forward. May include strategic plans, new budget, ways of doing things, reviewing fees and other things like that. But other than that, I guess unless we have anything else tonight, I kind of got to get going.
No,
And we're going to meet on the 12th. I think we just see if anybody else have anything they want to add to
The
that.
good news, we looked at our fees on building permits,
I remember we reviewed those.
and we made some subtle changes that have made a significant difference in permit fees. It's not like I want to zap everybody who comes in Whitman to get a house, but it's a one-time expenditure that supports the operations.
I think to the point Jeff made, we often find ourselves both in our expenditures and maybe more towards the bottom sometimes in our fees, but, I think we consider ourselves kind of a middle/average town. I mean, I'd like to even push us, like Jeff, a little bit outside of that, but, I mean, this is a great, small, tight-knit community. I think a lot of us have moved or stayed here for that reason. I don't think it hurts to push us and to take a hard look at some of those fees and say, we should be just above the average or just above the median or in line with the demographics that we have and are trending towards, right?
And I think when we set our salaries, we look at comparable, we look at area towns, what they're paying there. departments and so forth. So likewise, John mentioned, our fees, and look at area towns. Abington, you mentioned what they're charging the water, and, busing. You go to Abington, Rockland, you go to Weymouth, you're gonna pay for a bus. Those are towns, they're not regional school districts.
We used to do those every couple of years. I think some departments still do it, others may have gotten away, but this is a time to look at everything because it's all part of a plan.
So let me ask another question.
Yes.
Some of the financial policy that's also come out to Colin 7, when you do your projection, is it going to be like with the implementation of the policy?
So we did adopt the policy, right, Frank? So we did adopt those timelines and stuff like that.
Yes.
I think, were you still tweaking them?
Yes, I wanted to add a few
I
things
thought the
to it,
selectmen
actually.
approved it.
It was approved, but there are 3
So,
areas I want to add to it.
but I think it should be a comprehensive, like you said, I mean, if we're going to the town at some point, we're saying, we made this recommendation, this committee, along with this recommendation, then we also suggesting that, yeah, we've got some policies out there that should be, if not fully approved or finished, should be and disseminated to the finance committee, and they should be following them. I think we need to have the strategic plan, and the 5-year capital plan, but I think that's all gonna come sort of in a nice package at the end of this, so that when we are saying to the community, we did think about this, we did put it together, right, we considered all of these things. And, yeah, I mean, it's all in there, right? I don't think we should leave anything out.
Right.
And we may have to move forward with, I guess what I'd call substantially correct information, right? So we have an idea of what those policies should be. They may not be fully implemented. We may not know exactly, everything. But I think at the end of the day, because of the timing, we can use them if they become, final towards the end of this process to kind of check the work that we did. But I don't think we should be paralyzed by anything that we're
Well, our
missing.
policies, there was nothing in there, they were pretty innocuous, I thought, they were just good.
What we
best
did was we
management
tried
practices.
to fine line the development of the budget process so that we weren't scrambling in February. So by asking the departments to start doing their budgets this week and next, even under our new policy,
We're ahead of it.
we're ahead of it by a month.
No, wasn't there a percentage too, like of new growth, and percentage will go to the schools, percentage will go towards capital? percentage
No.
will
Yeah,
go to
because we
stabilization?
had numbers in there.
No,
There was
that we did not-
Stabilization numbers. in
Yeah,
there.
we did not define percentages because we have never come to terms on what the growth needs are in those various divisions. I had suggested that I think I said 70%, may have been a weak moment, of new growth should go to education. That's a number that you see in most towns. So how we get there is we identify our budgets, we look at the level of growth between those budgets, and we have to identify what the basic needs are. The only identification I believe we talked about was the percentage of allocation to the school. I don't believe there was any allocation percentage discussion for any other department.
I personally, I mean, I don't think, I think it's, this committee has got its hands full right now, but I do think that has to be looked at, and maybe we send that off to the finance committee.
Yep.
I don't know that we want, I know we had the other committee that was putting that together, but a lot of us are on that committee. And it's, there has to be some balance of,
It may come out of the back end of our recommendation anyway,
I think we
right?
should look at it. I think it's only
I
a few
think it
pages.
will. I
It's
think it
worth us
would,
all
by
taking a look
nature, it
at
would have to,
Right.
because it's going to define where the,
Hopefully it defines a picture.
Well, I think it's gonna be a big part of getting the school further ahead out of being in the middle and helping DPW and helping fire and being able to explain whether we're, if we're promoting, as we say, getting this community a little further along, and how are we gonna get them there? It can't just be one, hey, let's do an override.
right.
I mean, so I think we do have to look at it.
Okay?
But I don't know that we can solve it in between now and October, that's for sure.
Well, there's no further discussion. I'll make a motion to adjourn at 6:17 PM.
Until August
12th?
12th at 5 PM. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? None?
Yeah, that was an easy, that was easy.